Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts. Now, here's Jim Dubois.
As the weather warms and the first spring flowers begin to bloom, Access Minnesota visited the University of Minnesota's Landscape Arboretum, recently voted the best botanical garden in the country by USA Today. We sat down with Peter Moe, who's worked at the Arboretum for 40 years and was recently named director. Peter Moe is the director of the University of Minnesota's Landscape Arboretum. Peter, welcome to Access Minnesota.
I'm happy to be here, Jim.
Well, the Arboretum is more than 1,200 acres of gardens and landscapes. Can you give us an overview of what visitors will see when they visit the Arboretum?
I'm happy to do that. This is an amazing place. We have many different experiences, starting with very formal gardens around our visitor center and the adjacent Snyder building, gardens with brick edges and formal fountains and really beautiful plant combinations. And then as you move out into the 1,200 acres, you go to gardens that have many different landscaping styles and different types of plants. Gardens that there's naturalistic gardens that are mostly native plants that are less edging and flowing curves and not geometric, and lots of plant collections. You know, we're part of the University of Minnesota, and we're a long time associated with the Horticultural Science Department. And so our plant collections are long-term research. What are the best plants for Minnesota? Many were planted back in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and it's just extremely valuable to see how these plants perform over a long period of time. But in addition to that, they're beautiful. The crabapple collection is one of our biggest tree collections, and that's going to be in full bloom very soon.
Well, the Arboretum was recently named Best Botanical Garden by USA Today. What makes this garden so notable?
You know, it's many things. I think it does start with our research. The University of Minnesota started fruit breeding here in 1908. The Honeycrisp apple was developed here, the Marquette grape, you know, plants people read about, purchase in grocery stores and at farmers markets were developed right here. In the late 1950s, and when the Arboretum started, that research, the fruit continued, but the research expanded into landscape plants. So bringing plants from all over the world, trying to find what are the very best plants that will grow in the Minnesota winter. They have to tolerate the winter, but then are just spectacular in the spring. What plants have the best flowers, the best fall color, you know, all those different things to make year-round beauty in the landscape. And so we have this research base that everything is based on. But then we also have a full range of educational programs from preschool all the way to adult. All different topics around, all about plants, of course, but food, cooking classes and wine classes and gardening classes of all types, always talking about how we're connected to plants, how we depend on plants for everything we do. So the education is really important. And then you could look at our entire grounds as education as well, because the plants are labeled. People can walk through. There's lots of interpretive signage talking about this exhibit is giving people information on how to select a shade tree for their yard, or this exhibit how to select the best shrubs for your yard. So that's educational as well. But then beyond that, we're always striving to do the very highest quality design, landscape design, much of it done with our own staff, but also working with some of the best landscape architects in the area. And then the design includes picking the best plants, but then going beyond that to the best plant combinations and trying to have those combinations be beautiful, not just in the spring, but in the summer and the fall. So lots of thought and work goes into the design. And then maintenance, of course. It doesn't do any good to have a good design unless you have gardeners, and we have very highly trained and talented gardeners that will keep those gardens spectacular. So it creates a beautiful experience.
Minnesota has 4 very distinct seasons. How does the Arboretum provide plants and landscapes that are appropriate for each season?
You know, that's actually a big plus for us, having these seasons. You know, I'm aware of other arboretums, or I've visited arboretums in South Florida and South Texas and things. They don't have that, but we capitalize on every season. I mean, we're right here in spring now. We've planted over 60,000 bulbs last fall, so we have these amazing bulb displays. It started several weeks ago and will continue well into May. But we always have the crab apples, the lilacs, some of these plants that are just iconic plants for Minnesota. And so the spring is a fabulous time. We also have the wildflowers. We have a large restored wildflower garden with all of the native plants that grow in the deciduous forests in southern Minnesota. So that spring is a tremendous experience here. And then as you get into summer, gardeners know that plants are different plants in different seasons, and we have all of those. The summer starts with peonies and goes into roses in late June. July is daylilies and lilies, and annuals are at their peak, and all these hot colors and beautiful plant combinations. And so summer is a wonderful time too. And then we're really all about fall here. We have several hundred acres of maple basswood forest, and sugar maples, out of all the native trees in Minnesota, probably have the most outstanding fall color. And it varies from yellow to almost a burnt orange and different shades of red. So we have the sugar maple forest here is amazing, and you can drive through the 3-mile drive, and where you first start the 3-mile drive, it's like you're in a cathedral with a golden roof. It's just beautiful when the sun is coming through those leaves. But it's not just the fall color though. We do a huge pumpkin and squash display, which is fall. And then the biggest thing in the fall for us is apples, because I already mentioned this is where the University of Minnesota has been doing apple research for 108 years. And that research is still going strong. There's University of Minnesota apples being grown in apple regions across the world. But we want people that visit the Arboretum to experience that too. So we'll have apple tasting set up where you can test some of our experimental apples, taste them right here in our visitor center building. We'll have a huge number of grade school kids go over to the research center and actually have apple harvest program. It's all about science, about how were those apple flowers pollinated, of course, with bees last spring. How did the apples get bigger and sweeter during the summer with the leaves making sugar? And then how do people pick apples? And what are the different types of apples? So we're all about apples here. And so the combination of the squash and the pumpkins and the apples, not to say the fall flowers, asters and mums and everything else. This is a place that many people would not consider their fall complete if they hadn't been to the Arboretum several times. And then winter is a long season here in Minnesota. And so we've been doing many different things. We have had cross-country skiing since it was just starting as a sport way back in Minnesota, back in the 1970s. And we still maintain traditional cross-country ski trails. We have snowshoeing has really taken off. And our maple basswood forest, we've got trails and down through the wetlands. It's a fabulous place for snowshoeing. We do a lot of our education programs in the winter, and we have classes on floral design and cooking and many different other things. Some people will call and say, is the Arboretum open in the winter? And of course we absolutely are. We'll do orchids in the Great Hall. We have indoor farmer markets, so we try to capitalize on every season here, and we want our visitors get a lot of value of them because they can come different times of the year, visitors and members, and see completely different exhibits and experiences.
Are there certain plants that the Arboretum specializes in?
Yes, one of the things definitely is azaleas. That was the first research project that started here was azalea breeding. And back in 1958, there were no hardy azaleas you could grow in Minnesota. So the researchers were crossing some of the hardiest azaleas from northern Asia and things that performed well in New England and crossing those to making new hybrids. And the Northern Lights was the first introduction in the 1970s. Big pink flowers, the plants will get to be 6 or 8 feet tall, wonderful fragrance, and it just created a whole new landscape plant for Minnesota. And if you can buy the Minnesota azaleas, they all have lights in the name, so that's how you can tell they're from the Arboretum, and they're available at garden centers across Minnesota and beyond. So that's definitely a plant. Of course, apples, that's a University of Minnesota project that takes place here, and we're happy to take credit for it because our staff are the ones that are mowing the orchards and spraying and pruning and grafting, and the scientists at the U of M are doing the genetic work and the selection and naming new varieties. But that's a terrific project for us. And of course, arboretums have to be about trees. And so we've gone through, just since I've been here at the Arboretum, first a Dutch elm disease epidemic in the 1970s, and now we're having emerald ash borer. It's not currently in Carver County where we're located, but it's many other places in the metro. There's always these new invasive pests coming. So we've learned that it's really important to have a wide variety of trees to plant. And so we're showing people examples of trees they maybe never even heard of, or certainly are not widely planted. All the different species of oaks are great landscape trees. Ohio buckeye, Kentucky coffee tree, ginkgos, even catalpas with the beautiful flowers in June. So that's a really important thing of what we're doing, is that just showing the diversity of shade trees. And if all of us planted different trees, our neighborhoods would be beautiful, and we wouldn't be so worried about an invasive pest taking all of our trees out at the same time.
The Landscape Arboretum opened in 1958 and has grown exponentially. When Access Minnesota returns, a look at how the facility has evolved and focused its mission over the years.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages. You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Now back to our conversation with Minnesota Landscape Arboretum Director Peter Moe. Approximately how many people visit the Arboretum every year?
Jim, our attendance has been growing for the last 4 years, and in 2016 we had 464,000 people here, and it was quite a large increase over 5 years ago. And that just makes me feel great. It makes all of our staff feel great because we work really hard on trying to create better gardens year after year, cool exhibits, working with high quality artists, all the different things we do. And so when we see our attendance growing, it gives us it just makes us feel great because it shows people are appreciating what we do, and more people are interested in it. They're telling their friends and neighbors, they're bringing family members with, whatever. It's just really rewarding to all of us to have that attendance growing.
What do you view as the primary mission of the Arboretum? Is it education? Is it preservation, or is it an event space?
Well, it would only be an event space, Jim, in terms of that does help support the operation. We get about 10% of our budget from the University of Minnesota, so having weddings and having a gift store, those things you could say are just events, but they're still taking advantage of the Arboretum. The wedding is introducing lots of other young people to the Arboretum that may not have come here otherwise. And they're also going to be, the gardens, they're getting married right in a beautiful garden, so they're enjoying the plants, and the bride is the focus, but they're enjoying the whole experience. So events are important in terms of supporting the Arboretum. But we really are a similar mission to the overall university: research, education, and outreach. And we do those things differently because we're the only major public garden at the University of Minnesota, but they're all three, I would say, equally important. And the research we talked about with the plant breeding, the wetland restoration. We're also doing research on sustainable turf, different types of wet stormwater management here. We've got rain gardens and porous pavement. So the research will always be a very important part of what we do. And that really does put us up into the upper echelon of gardens that have the full range of activities. The world-class research, very high quality, innovative, and broad education programs. And then the gardens you could look at is really several of those things, but outreach is an important part of the gardens too. And then the outreach, we want to be beyond just the Arboretum here as well. We're the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, so we want to get information on our website, on Facebook. We have speakers that travel other parts of the country. We have groups coming here. We want to really get broadly spread the information about the great things happening here at the Arboretum and how it can be applied to people in their backyards or parks or other areas all across Minnesota.
How did you get involved with the Arboretum?
Well, I started working at a garden center. I grew up in Richfield and worked at a very large garden center when I was in high school. So I was interested in plants. I went to the university and started becoming a horticulture science student. And I happened to come to the Arboretum one day with my mother's garden club. And it was kind of I had a day off. I worked weekends, of course. They came out here on a Monday, and so they said, "You want to come with?" And okay, well, I'll go with. And so we were out walking in the 3-mile drive with my mom and her garden club friends, and there was a crew weeding the daylily beds. And I walked up to the crew leader and just said, I thought that looked kind of interesting. And I said, "Do you ever have any job openings?" And he said, "Well, one of our staff quit yesterday. Are you available? Could you start tomorrow?" And so I said yes. So I came in the next morning, and I've been coming here every morning since for over 40 years. But I already had that base of interest in plants. My grandparents had a cabin in Wisconsin, and my grandpa had taught me how to tell a white pine from a red pine from a jack pine, and my mother, was in a garden club, so we gardened at our yard in Richfield. So I had that base, but it just was kind of fortuitous that I happened to be out here at the right day.
Well, you were named director in September of last year. What is your vision for the future of the Arboretum?
Well, I'm working really hard with all of our great staff here to just continue the strong programs here at the Arboretum. We just finished a capital campaign. It was actually a comprehensive campaign last June, in June 2016. That included some new buildings, our bee and pollinator discovery center, our new gatehouse, a number of capital projects on the grounds. It included raising funds for endowment, which is really important for keeping the Arboretum going, and just raising funds for annual operations, which is a really important part of what we do. So that campaign is over, but there were some projects in the campaign, a new horticulture headquarters for our professional gardening staff, doing some agricultural demonstrations near the Bee and Pollinator Center, rehabilitating our red barn so it can be open to the public. Those are projects that weren't funded, but are a priority for our Board of Trustees and me to get those funded over the next couple of years and really finish all the high priority projects for the Arboretum. I also, because our attendance is growing, we need to make sure we have a high quality experience for everybody that comes here. And so we need to look at how people can safely access the Arboretum off the highway on the very busiest days, where we can add additional parking. Maybe we can use some park and ride lots in the area. So really responding to the growing visitor needs is another thing. And then continuing just to make sure we have very strong and high quality research and education programs. Those are things that I'm stressing.
How has the Arboretum evolved since its inception in 1958?
Well, it has changed quite a bit. Initially, there was only a little cabin on the grounds. A few plantings went in. The trails were wood chips. There was a short gravel road. And so it's really, but the trees were, a lot of the tree collections were planted way back in those early days that we're benefiting from now. And so those were planted largely in the 1960s, some of our amazing collections. But as the Arboretum grew, and grew in both acreage, started with 160 acres, and then the research center was 230, grown to 1,200 now. Then the road network expanded, which opened up new areas for plantings. The roads went from gravel to blacktop. We first built the Snyder building next door, which is a terrific building, a Lundy design with timber frame architecture and a beautiful library that's part of the University of Minnesota library system. Then we outgrew that building and had to build the Oswald Visitor Center, which we were really needed to do, with larger spaces for education and larger gift store, restaurant, restrooms, all the things we needed for the growing numbers of visitors. And at the same time the Arboretum was growing those physical facilities, the roads and buildings, the gardens were expanding. Nearly all privately funded. Went from one rose garden, now we have 3 beautiful rose gardens. The annual garden expanded and turned into both annuals in the summer and beautiful tulips in the spring. We've added tree collections, we've added research projects. The overall scope of the Arboretum has really changed significantly, and but we're still always trying to remain to have some of these beautiful natural areas. We're not going to go into the middle of the beautiful maple basswood forest and do new plantings or gardens. That would be preservation, but also it's managed because we want to keep the invasive plants out. We're working to keep buckthorn out and garlic mustard and some of these things that many of the viewers are probably dealing with on their own yards. And so we're managing them, but still creating great experiences. So I think we'll continue to grow like that, but it's going to be planned growth so that we have great experiences for people, but always have some new things so people, when they come out, they see something that wasn't here before.
This past winter, the Landscape Arboretum hosted a light display created by British artist Bruce Monroe. When Access Minnesota returns, more on this unique artistic collaboration.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages. You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Now, a look at how the University of Minnesota's Landscape Arboretum is attracting more visitors throughout the year. This past winter, the Arboretum featured a light show designed by the artist Bruce Monroe. How did that collaboration happen?
We were aware of Bruce's work. He is a native of the UK and has done a number of exhibits in the UK and other parts of the world, but his first exhibit in the United States was 6 years ago at Longwood Gardens outside of Philadelphia. And one of our staff members was aware of that and contacted the people at Longwood Gardens and found out they had a big boost in attendance, they had a big boost in membership, they had nothing but positive reviews from everybody that came to it. We thought, this is something we need to look at. So we looked at it back then, but it is a fairly expensive exhibit, and we didn't put a full business plan together. And so we thought, well, we really can't afford it. But in the meantime then, Bruce had exhibits at Desert Botanic Garden in Phoenix and Cheekwood in Memphis and Nashville, some other places. And we still were talking to people at American Garden Association meetings and things, and everybody was saying what a great experience for the the whole garden, for the whole community, it was to have Bruce Monroe. So we decided to do a full business plan, how we could increase our attendance, how we could sell food and beverages, special tours, let's put a package together, sponsors, all those things. And we figured out, we can actually make this go. And so we started planning over a year and a half ago, had invited Bruce here. He was entranced with the site. He has some kind of iconic exhibits that are somewhat repeated at different places he goes, but he always tries to do several exhibits that really are tied to the area. And when he saw our maple basswood forest and our sugar maple tapping operation, and he saw the farm, big round bales in the fields when he was driving around Minnesota, he had great ideas. And he said, I absolutely want to do a display. He says, I want to do a winter display, which was exactly what we had in mind. We already have our peak attendance in the spring, summer, and fall. We wanted, what can we do in the winter? So it was really a match that worked great. And so Bruce was visited several times, started refining his ideas. Most of the materials were actually assembled and designed and built in the UK and then shipped to Minnesota. He had a crew here for 5 weeks, along with about 60 Arboretum volunteers that assembled it all, and then we opened in November, and it was just a great experience. Bruce is just an engaging, friendly, unbelievably creative person, and he's inspired by books he read when he was a kid, by everything he sees when he travels around the world, and he'll see things and read things that make a completely different impression on him than anyone else, but he can translate it into beautiful light displays. And so this whole crew were just really great people, and we opened, we had great reviews from the critics around the Twin Cities, all the newspapers and TV and radio were out here, and all of a sudden people started coming, and with things on Facebook, you have to go to the Arboretum, it's an amazing display. And it turned out that many of the people coming had never been to the Arboretum before. So their first experience at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum was at night in the winter. But people bundled up, we were open every night. We didn't close once for cold weather. And so people were ready for it, and it was the kind of experience. There were 2 exhibits indoors. You could go out, see half of it, come in, and go out and see the other half. People just loved it. And the Arboretum looked completely different. If you had been here in the summer, you wouldn't recognize you were in the same place because the way the lighting was done. And it was just really a positive thing overall for the Arboretum. We're really glad we did it. And we're talking to Bruce about coming back in the future, not in the next year or two, but some point in the future.
Do you see potential collaborations with other artists?
I do. You could call Sean Kennedy, who does the Legos, an artist. We had Legos here 2 years ago, and that was a fabulous summer exhibition. That exhibit was developed at Iowa State University at Ryman Gardens. And when I first heard Legos, I thought, gee, I don't know if we want to do Legos that's plastic, but people absolutely loved it. And they were big birds and butterflies and flowers, and it was so fun to watch the minivans pulling in day after day. And they'd park in the parking lot, the grandparents would get out, their kids would get out, the grandkids would get out, the stroller. Every minivan had 7 or 8 people in it. It was just amazing. And it was that way the entire summer.
Tell us more about how the gardens are maintained. What goes into the care of these places?
Well, it starts with having a really professional staff. We hire people that have degrees in horticultural science, landscape design, related things like that, also many years of experience. So we have really high quality staff. It goes from that to amazing volunteers. I mean, you would not believe how how talented and loyal and hardworking many of our volunteers are. We could not do the display gardens, deadheading and weeding and edging and mulching, all these things that are really just, there's no way to do them quickly. They just take lots of hours, and the volunteers are amazing. And so the combination of well-trained staff and capable staff with good volunteers. We're starting to supplement now in the spring and summer with university students. We have international interns. We have people from countries like Belarus and Brazil and South Africa, coming to the Arboretum and working as a part of a training program through the University of Minnesota. So we put the crews are pretty diverse, but they work really hard. And I mentioned earlier, with the planning is really at least a year in advance. If you're going to be ordering the seeds and getting the plants started in greenhouses, so that there's lots of work year-round. In this winter, we're going full speed in our greenhouses, growing the annual flowers and the other plants. And so it's many people working hard, and we work with some of the local plant societies too, that are both great resources. They're really experts in plants like hostas and daylilies and dahlias. It really is a lot of people involved. And of course, it depends on all the members and donors and everybody that helps support the Arboretum, because it's an expensive process, but we think that it's very worthwhile doing and that many, many people benefit from it.
How has climate change impacted the Arboretum and the kinds of plants grown here?
Climate change, the biggest impact hasn't been on the warmer winters. That has been an impact, but we're always thinking that it just takes one winter to really cause a lot of damage on a woody plant, something like a tree, and so we haven't really jumped into growing a lot of trees that are not zone 4, which is the hardiness zone we're in. It certainly does impact, though. We're having less snow, which can impact things, but the biggest change we've seen is the rainfall patterns. We've just finished the wettest year in record. Prior to that, we had August was becoming, in 2013, 14, 15, was becoming one of the wettest months of the year. But we were sometimes having droughts in the spring and early summer, which is really difficult to deal with because that's when plants are putting on most of their growth. And that's when all of our new plantings are getting established. So having these major rain events where we get 10 or inches of rain at a time and then maybe no rain for 5 or 6 weeks, that makes it really difficult to manage plants and keep plants healthy and well growing. So other than upgrading irrigation systems so we're prepared for the droughts, and then we're doing some things with making sure that we're have good structures that can deal with these huge rainfalls, is about all we can do with that. But it definitely is, the weather patterns are definitely changing.
Peter Moe is the director of the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. Peter, thanks so much for joining us on Access Minnesota.
Well, I've enjoyed talking with you, Jim, and I'm really glad you and your crew came out here today.
That's all for this month's edition of Access Minnesota. We leave you with some springtime scenes from the University of Minnesota's Landscape Arboretum. We'll see you again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.